Okay, before we can spray the auto air, we gotta make sure we've covered any areas of bare metal. We're just using an etching primer. Obviously the auto air is water based, so it's not a good idea to shoot it over bare metal. We're just using the etching primer to seal in any areas of bare metal. Just 1 or 2 light coats should be enough. When that's dry, we go back overnight with a good high build 2-pack primer. Ideally we want to low bake this, and if possible leave it overnight. We're now sanding it down with 600 wet and dry sandpaper. You can also dry sand it, but Stunts is using 600 wet and dry here, removing any imperfections and gives it a good key for the auto air to stick to. Make sure everything's masked up and locked down. We're ready to spray. I'm using the 4000 series base coat sealer dark with no reducer, and I'm going to apply 2 or 3 light coats. You notice I'm working in fairly light coats. What you don't want to do is put this paint on too wet. It's a very, very high coverage paint, so you're just looking for a couple of 1 or 2 nice light dust coats will cover even primed areas. When you finish your first coat, you heat set it, and it should look very mottled. Don't be alarmed by this is perfectly natural, but it is important. The second coat is going to cover all this. Now I'm just applying the second coat. It looks like I'm putting it on pretty wet here, but that's just the sheen from the oven lights. I'm still actually putting on a fairly light coat here. I'm using about 1.5 quarts, that's about 1.5 liters, to do the whole car. It's very important to heat set it between coats. You can use an infrared light heat gun, or in this case we're just using the oven heat. But once we've got it completely set after 3 coats, this is the finish we should be looking for. And we're now ready to start the design. I'm just using 3mm fine line tape, laying it directly onto the base coat sealer dark. And I'm going over that with 2-inch masking tape. I'm using a scalpel with a 10A blade, and I'm cutting directly on top of the fine line tape. I'm drawing my design out now with a pencil straight on top of the masking tape. And I'm not happy with the overall look. I'm just going to cut it out and weed it out. Be sure not to leave any frayed edges, and make sure the whole thing's completely locked down. It takes a lot longer to fix underspray than it does to actually prevent it in the first place, so make sure you've got everything patted down. I'm just masking up the overall area. Obviously we don't want to overspray everywhere. When we've got everything masked up, we're ready to apply the colour now. I'm just using the gun as a blow gun here in conjunction with a tack rag to remove any surface imperfections. And now I'm ready to spray pearl black. You can see by the overspray and the masking tape just how light I'm actually working here. Just 2 very light coats will give us perfect coverage. I'm using about 10 ounces or 1/4 of a litre here for both sides and the front. So it's not a lot of paint, I'm just keeping it very, very light. I'm using my SATA mini jet with a 0.8 setup, and the paint is completely unreduced at this stage, just straight out of the bottle. When I've got the 2 coats on and heat cured it, we're just starting to lay down the checkered design now. Again, I'm using my fine line tape and I'm just trying to keep everything as random as possible. When I'm happy with the design, I lock everything down with 1 and 2 inch tape. And again, I'm just cutting the tape directly on top of the fine line tape. Taking care that I've got everything locked down. I'm going over the design now with pearl silver. Pearl silver and pearl black are part of the 4300 series. And again, I'm using about 10 ounces, 1/4 of a litre to give me 2 coats here. Very high coverage paint. Going in now with a second coat. And now I'm applying Sparklescent Mango over the top of the silver. The Sparklescent Mango is a very, very transparent colour, very vibrant, but you really want to shoot it over white, or in this case, pearl silver. And because it's so transparent, I'm going to apply about 5 fairly light coats here. This will give an almost candy effect in the sunlight. And there's the 5th and last coat going on. And you notice I'm just fading it over the top of the silver. I'm not flood filling the whole area. Sparklescents are very particularly suited for this because they're so transparent. You can get fantastic fades with them. Now I'm just removing the masking tape and the fine line. If you do happen to get any overspray, it's not the end of the world. Just take a bit of 2 inch tape. And I'm just killing the edge with my airbrush and my pearl black. Now I'm using transparent black with about 10% reducer. And I'm shooting this through a 0.5 needle airbrush. It's very important not to put too much shadowing in here. You're going to eat away at the original colour. Just a nice light overall shadow. And this is the beauty about the transparent range. It lets me work in nice layers and just build it up. When I'm happy with the overall design, I'm just starting to take off the masking tape now. And I'm using transparent base. I'm spraying transparent base over the whole area. The reason why I do this is because I'm about to put a lot of heavy masking over the top of this, and it's unlikely any paint's going to lift, but if I lay down 2 medium coats of transparent base, it really just locks everything down for me, gives me a nice clean surface to work to. I'm continuing the design onto the rear car again with a 2-inch masking tape with a slight overlap, and I'm cutting directly on top of the base coat sealer dark with my scalpel. I haven't even bothered to detack the masking tape. Some people are a bit apprehensive about masking over the top of water-based paint. Now here's just a quick demo to show you just how much you can actually get away with the water-based. I'm just spraying Iridescent electric blue fairly wet onto this steel plate. Hit it with the heat gun. I'm not suggesting you work this fast, this is just really a demo to let you see how strong the product is. And after less than 30 seconds, I'm applying another fairly wet coat. I've reached complete coverage with these 2 coats, and I'm just going back in again with the heat gun. So that's 2 wet coats with a 30-second flash off. I'm just going to lay down my tape, and again I'm not detacking. The metal plate's so hot I can barely touch it here, and I'm using my 10A scalpel, and I'm cutting right through the blue and the black into the steel plate. And there we go. 2 coats in 30 seconds. With no paint lift. The only problems you would ever have really with adhesion is obviously if you don't do your prep right, or you put the auto wear on too wet and don't heat cure it. If you follow those 2 simple rules, you'll never have paint lip. Just positively masking up the checkered flags now, using a combination of 2-inch tape and fine line. And when I've got the whole design completely masked up, I'm ready now to start applying the graphics. I'm just laying out the Stealth Creations logo, and I'm using application tape. This is really from the sign industry as opposed to the automotive industry. Making sure I get all air bubbles out. This is just an isopon spreader. And the purpose of the application tape is, well, obviously to let me apply the vinyl. Just carefully removing the backing. And I'm applying the vinyl directly onto the car. You notice I've used just some 2-inch tape down the sides to give me a rough guideline of where I want to put it. And I just lay it on, and again make sure that I get all those bubbles out. And just carefully remove the application tape. Okay, we're ready to spray now, and I'm using my Satin Mini Jet again with the 0.8 setup, and I'm using Iridescent Electric Blue Neat with no reducer. I'm doing it around the door checks and the windowsills. You could just go straight in with the big gun, but I like to do it this way. It keeps the paint build up to an absolute minimum. Now I'm just using my RP with a 1.2 setup, and again, no reducer. The Iridescent Electric Blue is a nice colour in its own right. I'm going to put some hot rod sparkles and stuff over it here, but Darren's just using it completely neat. And that's 3 coats over base coat sealer dark. Again, you can see the coverage here. Very easy paint to use. And that's 3 coats over base dark cleared. Very kind of Stevie here just to let us see both sides of the car. I'm now fading some iridescent purple over the top of the blue, and again I'm just using the Mini Jet for this. And I've mixed Hot Rod Sparkle Blue and Hot Rod Sparkle Purple at a ratio of 50-50. I'm shooting this through my RP. Two light coats. While the masking's still on, I'm taking the opportunity now to do my drop shadows for the flag with transparent black. I've got about maybe 10-20% reducer in here. I'm just removing now the positive area of the stealth creation. I'm still leaving a border of about 12 or 13 mil or half an inch, which will remain black. But I'm just exposing the inner parts of the letters at this stage. I've removed all the masking, now I'm sealing everything in with a transparent base. I always use the transparent base over the top of the Hot Rod Sparkles, or the Sparkle Flake, because it seems to fill them in a lot better for me. It means it takes less clear to fill them. For by all this, it also has good UV inhibitors. And just 1 or 2 light coats will do. I'm now starting to mask up the design. Just making sure I've got every area covered. I'm now going to use the 4500 Sparkle Flake series, and these are pre-mixed and ready to go. Just shake them up and put them straight into the bottle. And amazingly, I'm using a Mini Jet with a 0.8 setup. You see how much masking I've got up here? The Sparkle Flake tends to travel quite a bit, get a lot of overspray with it, so make sure you've got everything completely covered. And I'm looking to put about 4 or 5 coats on here. It's important to give it quite a good flash off and heat set it between coats. And I'm holding the gun about 14-15 inches away from the surface. third coat going on. You can see the coverage already. Keep it light, keep the gun well back for better atomization. I'm just drying this now with my SATA dry jet. There's really no substitute for heat, but because I've got vinyl around the Stealth Creations, that ½ inch of vinyl, I'm reluctant to put a lot of heat in there at this stage, so the dry jet's good for just drying it between coats when you've got vinyl on there. And this is orange flake I've used. And now I'm doing the Creations with cinnamon. You notice my finger just constantly switching off and on. What I'm doing is trying to create as much turbulence in the fluid nozzle as possible, and that gives you a much better atomization with the flake. Again, about 4 or 5 coats here, and I'm back in just locking everything down with my transparent base. This really is my get out of jail free card. It keeps everything even for me, gives me a much less of a build up, and makes clear coating a lot easier. And now that the vinyl's removed, I can get a lot of heat on here. Make sure the paint is thoroughly cured. Okay, I'm now just going to work on the back of the car, and I'm using metallic orange. I'm going to spray 1/3 of the whole car just using a 0.8 mini jet. When I used to use old solvent based paints, I would have had to use the bigger gun. The solvent based paints seem to atomize a lot more, they go on a lot drier, so subsequently I would have had to use the bigger gun. But amazingly, I'm going to do the back of the whole car with about 1 pint or ½ a litre of metallic burnt orange. Again, 3 coats over the base coat so they're dark. There's no dry overspray issues here, so obviously I'm using a lot less paint. If you do happen to get any imperfections, you can just knock them back with a piece of dry 800 or 1000. Obviously make sure you have heat cured it prior to this. And just dust another coat over the top. I'm now applying Sparklescent Mango over the top of the burnt orange, just 2 or 3 light coats. The Sparklescent range is part of the 4500 series of ultra bright colours. I tend to use these quite a lot in my helmet and bike designs because they're just so bright. And I'm just finishing the 3rd coat. Okay, now I'm taking some metallic brandy red and I'm just doing a fade from the bottom. Again, I'm not using any reducer here at all. This is one of the reasons why I use a 0.8 setup. I find with the 1 or the 1.2 setup in the mini jet, the paint comes out a little bit too quick, doesn't atomize just as well. If you are using like a 1.2 setup with a mini jet, you'd really want to put some reducer in there, but I like the 0.8 because it means I can use it straight out of the bottle. Just gives a higher level of atomization and helps the fades. Okay, I'm just using my transparent base again, Old Faithful. Just lock everything down for me, give me a smooth surface to work to. And 1 coat would be plenty for this. Back up to the front of the car now, and I'm shooting Iridescent bright yellow. And I'm just putting 3 coats on over base coat sealer dark. I'm using about a pint or half a litre to do the whole front of the car. It's pretty impressive for a yellow over black. It's at this stage I'm going to remove all the masking and clear coat the car, just to seal everything in. Give me a fresh start for when I start to do the artwork. You don't have to do this, you could easily continue working here, but I like to get everything completely sealed before I start my artwork. We've low baked the clear and left it overnight, and now we're sanding everything down. Darren's just using a DA sander here with the 1000 dry rubbing pad. You could wet sand this, it would take a long time. I find the DAs are a lot quicker. Any areas you can't get with a DA, or indeed if you don't have one, as I say, you can just sand it down with 1000 wet and dry. Okay, now we're ready to start the airbrushing. I'm just putting some drop shadows and highlights into the logos, and again I'm using my transparent black with about 10 or 20% reducer. The transparent black and the transparent white are the only 2 transparents that I actually use reducer on. It's not that they're any thicker than the other paints, it's just I need them to be a little bit more transparent, obviously for highlights and shadows. Most of the other transparents I just shoot straight through the 0.5 needle without reducing, but in this case I put about maybe 10 or, as I say, maximum 20% reducer. Now I'm in with my transparent white, just for the highlights. And you can see that extra 20% reducer really helps the white here. Just using the business card now for quick starburst effects. And that's the design pretty much finished. Ready for clear coating again. You can also run combinations here. I've used fuchsia and teal blue flake 50-50. You don't have to stick with one or the other. You can get some pretty good effects just by chopping and changing. Because it's liquid flake, you just pour it all into the one jar. And now I'm just putting some transparent base over the top of the flags. The reason why I'm doing this is whenever you sand something, when you sand your clear, whether it's wet or dry sanding, you leave thousands and thousands of scores in it, and it's very difficult to see the colours. It's a bit like looking through frosted glass. So the first thing I do is just put some transparent base over the top of the sanded clear. It brings all the colours out, resaturates them, and lets me see where I'm going. Particularly important if I'm using dark or black colours. Now I'm just using my transparent white mix again, just to raise some highlights on the flag. You want to use the transparent white quite lightly here, quite sparingly. It really does eat into your colours a lot. It's just for tiny highlights. And now we're positively masking up the flags to start the hood mural. Again, I'm just laying down 2-inch tape with a fine overlap. I could use application tape here. Application tape's good for designs like this in big areas, but it's quite porous. It's not that tacky and it's quite porous. And after 3 or 4 hours, you get a lot of air bubbles and stuff starting to creep into it. So I'm just going to use 2-inch masking. Keep your overlaps down to a minimum. And now I'm just drawing the design on. In this case it's a skull. Obviously if I need to make any corrections at this stage I can just use a rubber. And when I'm happy with the overall design, I just cut out with my 10A. And just weed out the eyes and the nostrils. Make sure I've got a good clean edge and everything's pressed down, and we're ready now to airbrush. The airbrushes I'm using are Iwata, specifically the HP BCS Eclipse with a standard 0.5 needle, and I'm using my Createx AutoWear Fast Blast bottles for speed. And the first colour I'm using is transparent root beer. I'm keeping the airbrush well back, working quite fast and just getting a nice overall dusted look. This is another one of the reasons why I use the fast gloss bottles. If you imagine using a chrome side cup or a top feed airbrush, when you're using the airbrush at this angle you could get a lot of paint spillage everywhere. I just find the fast gloss bottles are a lot quicker for me, and I don't have to worry about any paint spillage. Not being too fussy at this stage, just trying to get the paint in as quickly as possible. You can just see how transparent this root beer actually is. I'm using it completely unreduced, just straight out of the bottle. And I'll be using transparents for the entire mural. Now I've laced my root beer with about 20% transparent black. This is just to establish a darker area around the cuts. And I want to work pretty light here, I don't want to overkill it. You can just see the darker areas now starting to form up. And I'm just weeding out my second series of cuts. I actually made these cuts right at the start. The reason why I cut them at the start is with all the overspray, sometimes it can be a bit hard to see them. They're a bit diffused. So I made these cuts right at the start and I'm just weeding them out now. And I'm just switching now back to my original root beer mix. Another great advantage of water-based over the solvent-based is the mill thickness of the paint. Whenever I remove this masking, I'll be left with hardly any edge whatsoever. You'll barely be able to feel it, even though I'm putting quite a bit of paint in here. With the old solvents and stuff, it just seems to give you a bit more of a big build-up. It's not the end of the world, but it just takes a bit more clear to cover them. And I'm just progressing now with the neat root beer. I've removed all the masking now and I'm just starting to freehand some scallops and shapes in. Again, I'm still with the root beer. I'm spraying about 40 psi here with the 0.5. The reason why I like to paint this way is I put the iridescent colour down first, and these paints are very transparent, so as the light passes through the root beer and the orange or whatever, it interacts with the iridescent underneath, so the whole mural shimmers. Gives you a very deep, the colours look really saturated and very bright in the sunlight. You see how easy it is to blend with the transparents? Progressing a bit further now, and amazingly at this stage I've used about 1.5 or 2 ounces of paint for the whole mural. Just going in here, nice light passes, just layering and layering slowly. I'm just finishing off now with the root beer. I've most of the mural covered at this stage, and amazingly I've still only used about 4 ounces or 120 milliliters of paint. Just remove the masking now. It gives me a better look, gives me an overall feel of the whole mural. And at this stage we want to heat set the whole thing down. You can use a heat gun or infrared, or you can use the heat of the oven. It doesn't really matter, but it is important just to get some heat on there. And now I'm just going over with some transparent orange, and I'm just really blending at this stage, just warming everything up. You see, I don't have to be overly accurate here. Just keep the airbrush well back, just blending, fading everything, pulling the colours together. Just progressing away here with the orange. And I've used about 1.5 ounces of orange. Tiny amounts of paint needed here. Another reason why I like working in this system. And I'm just starting to do the teeth or the fangs. This is the only time in the whole piece that I'm not using transparent. I'm using flame yellow here from the 4200 series with a couple of drops of transparent base in there. Just the transparent yellow would be a bit too light, a bit too subtle to go over the root beer here. And that's it, pretty much ready for clear coating. You notice I haven't really highlighted as such, I've just simply left areas of bright yellow. The mural on the back, again, I'm using transparents. The difference being this time I've just completely free-handed everything. See how much atomization I can get with a transparent white, and as I say, that's just really using about maybe 10 or maximum 20% reducer. Again here I'm using flame yellow this time with some transparent extender in. Just be asking a bit much of the yellow to go straight over the orange like this, but other than that the entire mural was done with transparents. Just using the transparent orange there. These are really the exact same colors that I used on the hood mural, but obviously the effect's completely different because I'm putting them over the top of the mango instead of the iridescent yellow. But they're exactly the same colors. And back in with the orange just to give the whole thing a bit more depth. Just trying to create a bit of a contrast here between background and foreground. I'm just using some transparent white here, not much, just a bit around the edges. And I'm back in now again with my original root beer and 20% transparent black mix. I'm using this just for contrast and give a bit more depth. And now I'm just switching to transparent purple. This is neat purple, and I'm using it really just to warm everything up a bit. Just make everything a bit easier to look at. Have to be careful here because I've already put my white highlights in. Typically I leave my white highlights right to the very end. In this case I didn't. I'm just finishing with transparent purple. But it is important that I don't obviously spray the transparent purple over the white or it'll look quite false. I'm just using it really to give a lot of depth and warm everything. And now we're ready for the final clear coat. Darren's just using the blowgun here to get any moisture out, and using the tack rag to remove any surface imperfections, particularly along the seams and the door handles. And we're ready to apply the first coat. I'm just using my RP 1.2 setup with my 2-pack clear. And I'm just doing it around the door checks and stuff. My first coat's really just a very, very light coat. It's just like a climatization coat, really. Not too fussy, I'm just putting it on very, very light. It's extremely important not to put the first coat on too wet. Just give it a very nice, almost dust coat, and give it a good 10 or 15 minute flash off time. You see how light I'm working? You really don't want a good gloss finish at this stage. And I give it about 15 minutes and put on my second dust coat. And after about a further 15 minutes I can now start loading up, putting on the wet coats. I'm putting on about 4 real heavy coats here with a 15-minute flash off time between coats. And obviously I'm using my SATA air-fed mask. These fumes are very, very toxic. We low bake the car and leave it again, preferably overnight. And we now sand the whole car down. Again, we're using the 1500 dry sanding method. Or you could just hand sand the whole thing with 1500 wet and dry. This way is obviously a lot quicker. And once we've got the car completely sanded and denibbed, we just have to polish it, and that's it, finished. Here's some ideas of color blends you might want to try. I'm just using Iridescent electric blue straight in the gun. I've got a steel panel and I've sprayed it black, masked up one half, and I'm just laying down some Iridescent electric blue. Again, always heat set between coats. And I'm just finishing the third fairly light coat of Iridescent electric blue. I've removed the masking to expose the base coat sealer dark one side and the blue on the other side, and I'm putting on a very light coat of Gem Ruby. Again, I'll heat set that and lock it down. And 2 or 3 nice light coats of the ruby. And you can see the difference between the Iridescent electric blue and the base coat sealer dark. When this is cleared and the sunlight hits it, you get a big contrast, massive depth. You can just see how bright and vibrant these colours are. Okay, this time I'm just shooting Pearl Plum, again over base coat sealer dark. I've positively masked up one side to leave the dark. And I'm just laying on the first coat of Pearl Plum and heat setting. Three coats for coverage. And now I'm using silver, Flare Silver Spectrum. I find when you're using the flare range, for maximum effect if you can keep it very, very light. I know that's a general rule of thumb for custom painting, but I really try and dust the flare range on. It just seems to give it much more depth, makes it much more vibrant. And I'm just shooting really 2 coats over the top here. And again, when it's cleared, you can see the effect. Now I'm taking some transparent red violet. And I'm just mixing in some Hot Rod Sparkle purple at about 50-50. Because this paint's transparent, I'm shooting it over a white background, typically white or silver. There's no real set rules, obviously it's custom painting. You can just make it up as you're going along. This is just a couple of ideas, some scenarios you might want to try. Again, keep the first coat pretty light. Nice even atomization. And heat set it. Because I'm working with a transparency, I'm going to want to use typically about 4 or maybe 5 good coats here. This is the last coat going on. I've pretty much reached full coverage at this stage. I've reversed masked now, and I'm using transparent fire red. And I'm going to go 50-50 with the Hot Rod Sparkle purple. With over 200 colours in the Autowear line, effectively it's just limitless with the scenarios you can now come up with. Here's just a few ideas. And again, I'm shooting this over white. Fifth coat here, full coverage. And just for an extra kick, I'm spraying some neat sparkle purple. Just one very, very light dust coat over everything. And when this is cleared, it's going to give an ultra deep, almost candy effect. Another huge advantage of the auto wear is that when you finish your paint, you can just pour it straight back into the bottle. And to clean your gun out, you can just use water. This is just water straight out of the tap. It's completely free. No need for expensive thinners or gun cleaners. And a couple of blasts, and that's your gun clean, ready for the next color.